Hello and welcome to our quick tutorial on Blender cycles and depth of field. So this is the generic sort of Blender setup. We have Blender render. We're going to switch over to cycles render. This is a completely different game engine. It uses different materials and texture techniques. It uses different algorithms, and the back end of this is completely different to the internal engine. And it is a superior render engine and give you better effects in terms of lighting. It's not compatible with the game engine, so if you're using the Blender game engine, setting up materials and textures in cycles will not be helpful at all. However, the next two projects you have to do for me are animations, so I would suggest you animate them in cycles rather than in the internal game engine. The only problem with that will be if you then want to, if you've got a character, for example, and you want to use that in the game engine, you're going to have to reassign all its materials and textures. But that is not the end of the world. Okay, so we're in cycles. So the first thing we're going to do is slightly optimize it. So I'm going to go user preferences in Blender, system. And by default, this will be set to none, or normally is. So you need to change this to CUDA and then select your graphics card. So mine's a GTX 760. And that will just mean that I can use that to render, and it'll be faster, obviously depending on the speed of your processor and the speed of the graphics card. One will be outperform the other. Now in the render tab in the properties window, I can change to GPU compute, and now when I go to rendered, when I rotate in 3D, it's giving me a rendered version of my character, or in this case it's a cube. Okay, so the quality settings in this, obviously we still have our resolution, which is very important, how big the image will be, or the video. We can tell it that we want the background under film here to be transparent, so that there's an alpha channel, so we can see through the background for a still image, or leave it to be like a background color or a sky color, which would be determined in here. And then this is very important here, is sampling. Now, it says preview 32, and in my opinion that's too high. And I'll put it in as something like 6. And then render 128 is very high. And now a finished render, like a high quality render, would be about 300. And samples is basically the number of times it's going to come back and look at all of your edges, etc., and make them smooth, and it's about the quality of the finished render. So I'm just going to put this down to 20. Just for what we're doing in this exercise, so that we don't spend too long rendering. Okay, so let's make a material and then do a basic UV unwrap to our cube here. Okay, so we go over here to materials, and I have the default material, and it has this button here, use nodes. You can see I've expanded my timeline, and I'm going to swap this over to be the node editor. Now, at the moment, nodes are not turned on. That's because we haven't done anything in cycles yet. So I'm going to go use nodes, and by default, use nodes is now turned on. I cannot, for some reason, zoom in here, so excuse me for a second. I just want to make sure my mouse is set up correctly. There we go, much better. Now, so we clicked use nodes, and then these appeared, and the nodes were turned on. So this is the output, and you can see I've got displacement, which is to change the shape of the geometry. Volume, which is a volumetric effect like fog or a cloud. And then surface, which is what we'll use most of the time. So the color of the surface. This is a basic diffuse, is basically a color. So this is the color of the surface. So, I can change it to green or to red. Now, I can't see it here because I'm in solid mode, so let's go to rendered mode. So it's red, and I can change it here to blue or to green, etc. And you can see the colors over here. So these are nodes. Now, if I want to unwrap this like you would if you were putting in, I don't know, let's go back to solid mode here. If you were unwrapping a character. So let's just go to the UV editor, and we're going to go U and Smart UV Project, and then we have this here. So I'm just going to put an image on this. So I'm going to go open, and I'm going to go to, where will I go to get an image? Here are images that I'm using for a game in Unity. They're like sort of cards. So we'll just pick, I'll pick our fairy here, and we'll go open. So there's my image. I'm not really interested in the content of the image. It could be any photograph. It's just to show you how it works. So I've UV unwrapped this, and I go over here to rendered, and I'm still green. So it hasn't appeared. How do I get that image to appear on the cube? Well, in our node editor, we go add. We can go add down here, or use the same shortcuts we use up here, which is Shift A. Add, texture, image texture. And here I select my picture, and then I join color to color, and I'm replacing this color with the color of or the colors that are on this. So you can see there it is there. So so that's basically the Cycles render engine. Obviously this is kind of very complex. You don't have to start tabbing in and out of textures here. It can all be done inside this window. You can group, these are each individual one of these called a node. You can group them together, and you can make very highly complex node trees. Just we have a very quick look at different types of shaders. So if you want something to be glossy, emission, so the lights in using this render engine, we'll have a very quick look at lights. So let's go to solid mode and zoom out a bit and have a look at a light. So there's our light there. And again, we click use nodes. Now we only have to click use nodes for the objects that were already in existence in the scene. If I add a new light, it will automatically use Cycles. So here, here are my nodes. So you can see that it's the same thing. It's got a surface output, and it's got a strength. So if I go to rendered, even though the light's up here, if I change the color of the light, you can see the color changing here. If I change the strength of the light, it's got darker. Now, on that note, let's just go to our world settings and go use nodes. And then here, click on the world. So if I make this completely black, okay, so this is no longer, there's no longer any light coming from the world itself, no ambient light. Now let's go back to our object. So this is the light that we're using. So as I increase the amount of light from my point light, I can see my object. And again, I can change the color. Now the last thing I want to show you is a thing called depth of field. And depth of field is an optical effect. It's actually a flaw in most lenses, or not maybe a flaw is the wrong word. It's a characteristic of a glass lens. So I'm going to take this object here, and I'm going to go Shift D, and Shift D, just duplicate it a few times. Now, we can see all these objects, and maybe we'll tweak our camera a little bit using this. There we go. Now, I'm going to select this object here, and I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call it Focus. Now, this functionality has nothing to do with Cycles. You can use this in the Blender internal engine as well. So we're going to go into rendered mode, and we're going to select this lamp and make it much brighter. Actually, instead of doing that, what we'll do is we'll go to the world, and we'll make our background just add a little bit of light in the background so we can see things a bit better to distinguish our objects. And I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll take this cube here, and we will delete that so they're all green. Just make them easier to see, that's all. No additional functionality or anything, just easier to see in the viewport. Excuse me. So I'm going to select my camera. And I'm going to go to the camera settings here, and I'm going to go down to this thing here, this panel, depth of field. Now it's asking me for the object to focus on. So in the scene, where should I focus? So I'm going to focus on the cube I've renamed Focus. And then under aperture, all I need to do is use this slider here. The bigger the number, the more out of focus other objects are. So objects in the foreground and objects far away. So basically I'm setting, this is my focal plane. So this is the line, or if I look from the top, so this is my object here. So the focal plane is on this line here. So anything on this line will be in focus, and what's in front of it will be out of focus, and what's behind it will be out of focus. And how much out of focus is determined by this setting here. If you're using a real camera, you would control this with the zoom, and you control with the iris. But in 3D, we only have one value, and you can see you can get quite dramatic effects. And obviously, this is massively out of focus, but it's used quite a lot in cutscenes. It's like it's a characteristic of photography, but it's used a lot in cinematic cutscenes and computer games. And it's a tool. So you can imagine, if you have this more subtle sort of effect here, you're drawing attention away from these objects and towards this one here. So it's a way of directing the eye of the viewer for you as a director. So it's like it's an interesting sort of compositional tool. And obviously you can overdo it, but it's an interesting tool to have when you're rendering out animations. So it's going to render that using cycles. And there's a whole bunch of other many tools that we should examine, but we'll do them over the next few days and weeks. And we're just going to press render, and we'll have a look at our finished render using the cycles render engine. So there we go. So that's a basic render using cycles and using depth of field.